Hi, it's Craig with you this week, and without Richard, unfortunately, he's overseas. I'm sure he's having a great and a mindful time there. So it's a shame that he can't be with us here today. But we've got some great things to discuss this week, and summing up for the final week of the course. Now, in terms of some of the topics that have come up, the mindful eating has been a topic of particular interest. And a lot of people noticing that enjoying the food more, just taking more time to eat. And also, I suppose there are three S's of mindful eating. The first thing is satisfaction. If we're eating in an unmindful way, we're just shoveling the food in and there's no particular enjoyment with it. And it's a very natural part of life, a good thing to enjoy. So the first thing is satisfaction. The second S is satiety. That is, we can recognize kind of better when we've had enough. And it's one of the things about eating unmindfully, it's so much easier to overeat, to go past where the body wants to be as far as when it's had enough. And the other thing is space. That is space in our day. Because we often fill the mundane moments with lots of thinking about the stuff we've got to do and the stuff that we have been doing. And if we just treat these simple moments in our day of just eating and as just an opportunity to have some space in the day, just to have a meal break and just to enjoy that and to go back afterwards in a more engaged and present way to get on with the work that we need to do and so on. So there's been some questions about, well, what about the social element? You know, what happens if you're at a dinner? You know, say, don't talk to me, I'm sitting down, I'm tasting my food. But of course, we can be eating and tasting the food, but your attention switches and you're interacting with somebody. I guess when the attention's on what somebody's saying while we're chewing our food, we're not really tasting it necessarily, but you could be present to the conversation that you're having. But it's not like we have to all eat in silence necessarily, but it's great to take the time in those moments, even when we're eating in a social environment, to really taste the food, at least those first few mouthfuls, and then just to interact with people in a natural way. We don't want people to feel artificial and, you know, mindful eating some kind of strange thing that we have to do where we cut off from others. It has come up questions about, well, food's often associated with things that are hedonistic, and really it depends on the way in which we're eating and the motivation for eating. We can certainly be very greedy about food and eating for pleasure and not for health and for the body's need. But if we're eating, and it's a natural thing to do, and it is pleasurable because it is something that the body needs. If something was basic for survival, and it was unpleasant, well, we probably wouldn't survive. So it's a natural thing to enjoy food, but if we're eating in a mindful way, we're possibly making more conscious food choices, but we're also conscious about when enough is enough. So that the hedonistic eating, which is sort of getting just so drawn into the pleasure that we eat unhealthy things and perhaps way too much, that's not a good recipe for long-term health and happiness. And the food and emotions was another thing that came up as well. And often these days there's so much guilt around food, so much preoccupation around it. So people often notice that they're kind of guilty. And you sort of see it a lot in advertising. You know, it's if something's 2% fat, then, you know, sometimes things are advertised as being 98% fat or guilt-free. And so there's often a lot of unhealthy emotions around food, unhealthy preoccupation. And if we are going to have one of those really pleasurable foods, a little bit of empty calorie, then okay, enjoy it in moderation, but when enjoying it, then just really taste it. Rather than eat it while we're actually giving our attention to guilt and not enjoying it and getting the empty calories for no good reason either. But other things in day-to-day life as well, about mindful walking and just the simple moments in our day to take the opportunity to be mindful. And again, it's space in our day. It's not walking and worrying because that's not so helpful. And those walking in a mindful way can be not only a great way to enjoy the elements, but also to come back to school, come back to work, or come back to home and be in a more mindful state. Mindfulness in the home has been a bit of a theme as well, and just enjoying the colour and the richness of the sensory experience of being at home, the colours, the sounds. A few learners have noted that they have tinnitus, and that's a reasonably common thing, especially as we get older. And One of the things that's been found to be helpful for tinnitus is actually very consistent with the principles of mindfulness, that if the sound is there, it's there. If we get annoyed about the sound, we're trying to block out the sound of tinnitus, then we actually become hypervigilant for it. And so it becomes even more intrusive. So being able to notice the tinnitus, but to, in a sense, be less interested in it and engage our attention with the other sounds that are going on. So, and learning not to be angry or irritated about it. So it's that non-reactivity, but also the gentle shift of attention to the things that are going on around us, the other sounds, the birds that might be singing, the people who might be speaking. We've had obviously a longer formal practice of meditation this week, and many learners have found how easily the time seems to pass, despite the fact that it's a longer period of practice. But also some have found it a little bit challenging. Many have noted that the mind wanders off a lot more, especially with the longer practice. And some have noticed that the time flows very easily, and of course when we're not thinking about time, time does seem to flow more easily. And but the noticing of the mind wandering is a sign of mindfulness, becoming aware that it does that. But just remembering what we've tried to reinforce throughout this this whole program, that the mind wandering, learning to be less judgmental about it, less reactive about it, just the noticing and the gentle re-engagement of attention as we do that. In a sense, it's not a criticism that the mind wanders, because that's what the mind is habituated to doing. It's, in a sense, like its nature, but we're exercising that area of the brain that's noticing and gently re-engaging the attention. And if we do that, if we're patient with ourselves, it gets easier and easier and easier to do that, and the wandering of the mind becomes less of a stressor, and it's just something that we're noticing. Questions have come up as well about, but is meditation an escape? And look, it's really not, and particularly mindfulness meditation, or any good form of meditation, is not really designed to be an escape. Although I dare say that somebody could be practicing that. Things desperately need our attention in day-to-day life, and we're putting it off, and we're just going off and walling ourselves off somewhere and meditating for a long period of time, but not getting on with the things in our day-to-day life that need our attention. So it could be used as an escape, but that's not really how it's meant to be, because mindfulness is all about engagement. It's all about an ability to engage, not avoid the things we need to get on with, but to be able to engage with them, but in a more focused and present kind of way. So in a manner of speaking, the mindfulness meditation is a preparation for life. It's, in a sense, helping to hone the state of mind and body that's useful to take back out into day-to-day activities. It can be a way of refreshing and refueling, because there's a lot in our day-to-day life. It'd be a little bit like saying, oh, taking a car in for a service. Is that a way of avoiding and escaping the things that the car needs to be doing? It's not. It's a way of helping to maintain and care for the car, i.e. the body and the mind, but to be able to, to help it to be serviceable and useful in a more sustainable way. So, and that's one of the things that's certainly been found in some of the research. Some of Ruth Bayer's work looking at a strong correlation between mindfulness and emotional intelligence, but also more mindfulness meant less things like avoidance and neuroticism and so on. And avoidance is not a mindful thing to do. And we'll know that when we're avoiding something, that we know we need to be getting on with it, but we're turning away from the thing that needs our attention, and we know that that doesn't lead to the sort of release and freedom that comes with being truly mindful. In fact, the release and freedom comes with eventually engaging with the thing that we've been avoiding or procrastinating about and actually responding to it. That's when we get the relief. So some of the cognitive practices too have been deepening in terms of the discussion and dialogue about it and the appreciation of it. But letting go of an event that perhaps in the past was difficult, but being reminded of it on a daily basis. And the letting go in that kind of situation is not to pretending it didn't happen, but we are reminded of something, perhaps from the past, on a regular basis. Fair enough, but the elaboration, the rumination on something about the past. So we see something and then we start to elaborate and start to get drawn into a whole default mode of commentary and criticism about it. So the letting go there is we see something and then there's perhaps a remembrance of something in the past, but that's all right, we note that, but we just gently re-engage and just stay present to what's actually happening now. And it's letting go. It's not a denial, it's not a suppression, but it's the thought, the memory, or the feeling related to it may arise, but there's not the attachment to it. There's a kind of a detachment that's not a cold pretense that the feeling or the thought is not there, but there's the ability not to be caught in it. It's like, rather than holding on to the rope, it's like just letting go of the rope, because when we attach to something, we can get very much dragged around by every thought or feeling that comes in, and life feels like a bit of an endless tug of war with ourselves and with the environment. So the letting go is the noticing with the non-attachment, not the denial that it's actually there, and the coming back to the present, even though the mind wants to keep diving into the past. So detachment in a mindful way is different to understanding detachment as in dissociation. For example, the sort of the numbing that can happen with feeling cold and removed. There's an awareness, there's an appreciation, the feeling is there, and it could be a feeling of sadness and so on. So there's an ability to feel it with awareness, not to deny it, but not to be, in a sense, caught up with it. That certainly with strong emotions requires quite a lot of patience and gentleness and practice. So in a sense, we don't have to be dominated by the emotion, dominated by the thought. Questions too about how long does it take to reverse the effects of allostatic load? Well, they reverse in a very small way every time we practice being mindful and come back to the present, switch off the unnecessary activation of that whole stress response. But the cumulative effect happens over time. So within weeks and months and indeed years, that is sort of like an accumulation of the benefits of being more mindful. So those changes in immunity that can be very negative, for example, within a few weeks are actually reversing. So there's better immunity. The changes that happen in the brain within weeks to months are starting to show evidence of reversing themselves. But we do need to do it consistently, and it'd be like saying, well, how long does it take to reverse the effects of being unfit by not doing any physical exercise? Well, you'd say, well, every time we do a bit of physical exercise, it's an investment in well-being, but it does take weeks to months to really improve those or to reverse those negative effects. So be patient with the process. See it as a sort of a long-term thing. So there are benefits that happen in the short term, but it certainly does accumulate in the long term. So that's all we've got time for today. And just to remind you as well that there is the Maintaining a Mindful Life program that starts on June 25, if you'd like to do that as an extension of today. And if you'd like to do also the Mindfulness for Wellbeing and Peak Performance program again, or to recommend others to do it, then that'll be running again in October. So thank you again for all of the wonderful contributions from our learners and also for our moderators who've done such a great job, Sherelle and Liv, and all of the team behind the scenes at Monash and FutureLearn who do such a great job to provide this program. And so we'll look forward to seeing you later in the year, and thank you once again.